Episode 57. You said she was your wife. After the call, Marilyn Tucker went through the kitchen door into the yard and waved to her husband Henry in the distance. James's parents were a hard-working rural couple who had lived their entire lives in the hills outside Westford, Virginia. They'd been to nearby Roanoke and Lynchburg a handful of times over the years, but their experience in cities of any size was limited. "Come and get a fire going in the wood stove," Marilyn called. "James will be here soon." Henry poked his head out from under the hood of a 1972 Ford F-100 he'd managed to keep running all these years, and looked over towards their modest farmhouse. "Huh, look how happy you are, woman. You'd think you'd been gone for a decade. I'll be there as soon as I finish up here." His son was coming home. Although he too was thrilled, he tended to keep his emotions in check. James often said he was right out of Hollywood's central casting, the stoic working man. Marilyn marched over to where he was working and slapped the bed of the pickup. "Your son is bringing his girlfriend here today. Never mind the truck and come make the fire." That caught Henry's attention. "What? Really?" "Yes, really. Would I lie to you about something like this?" The couple, into their 70s but still quite sturdy, walked together to the house. Henry didn't even bother to stow his tools back in the garage. Marilyn could barely contain her excitement and had to call several of her friends with the news. Soon it was posted on the town's Facebook page, which many of the middle-aged and older citizens in the area used as a modern-day message board. Coming from a rural, mostly blue-collar section of the state, James Tucker was one of the few children from the region to attend college. He had graduated from Westford 3 years ago and stayed in the New York metropolitan area to work. Everyone in Westford wanted to see what kind of beautiful city girl he would bring home. Henry and Marilyn were hospitable people, and Westford was a close-knit community. As such, Marilyn didn't think twice about inviting anybody who wanted to stop by that night for supper. Once word got around, it seemed as if half the town had found an excuse to head up to the Tucker house for a bite to eat, a coffee, or a beer. They planned what they would bring to contribute to the festivities. Everyone knew the real reason to be there was to snoop on James's girlfriend, but that was all part of the fun. Very soon, the Tucker farmhouse had taken on the feeling of a wedding. The mountain roads leading to Westford were rugged by New York standards, but it was no trouble for the off-road Mercedes G55 AMG. James was out of practice driving the curves and steeps of the Blue Ridge, so he drove slowly and carefully. By the time he got to town, it was already 8 o'clock. Although Vanessa was excited to be in such a different environment than she was used to, it was dark out. She couldn't truly appreciate the scenery of the quaint mountain town. After the 4-hour drive, she was feeling a little bit tired. They'd stopped singing along with the radio about an hour before. Now she sat quietly in the passenger seat. As James drove through the middle of Westford, he expected to see more people. Sitting on their porch out in front of the general store, the typical rhythms of a small Blue Ridge town. But he didn't see a single person, not even a child. Strange, he wondered aloud. Where is everyone? They drove out of the north end of town and began the final climb up to his parents' place. As James rounded the last bend and pulled up to his childhood home, he couldn't believe his eyes. The driveway and yard were crowded with vehicles. Every light in the house seemed to be on, and they could hear voices and laughter even with the SUV's windows up. "It's so late," Vanessa said. "Why is your house so lively?" James just shook his head. "Oh no," was all he could say. He parked the car, and they both got out. Right then, a group of children rushed out from the woods behind the garage. "James has got a girlfriend, James has got a girlfriend," they sang out, then ran off giggling. With a wide-eyed Vanessa in tow, James opened the front door and entered the house. A party was in full swing. People stood or sat around in knots, beers or cups of coffee in hand, chatting up a storm. There was a sense of bustle coming from the kitchen. A table laden with platters of fried chicken and all sorts of side dishes was set up off to the side. A separate table held desserts, several pies, a cobbler, and cookies. The Grand Ole Opry was playing on the radio. As soon as they walked through the door, the place erupted. Hugs and handshake for James. More hugs and smiles for Vanessa. Although James had said absolutely nothing to his mother about Vanessa being his girlfriend, everyone figured that as long as he brought her back to Westford, she was his girlfriend. It became clear within the first minute that they were more enthusiastic to welcome her than to see James. This grand, unexpected welcome stunned Vanessa. She was no stranger to big social scenes, but as a city girl through and through, she'd never experienced anything like this before. Marilyn gave her son a long hug, then an even longer one to Vanessa. Henry kept it to a manly handshake for James and a cordial introduction with Vanessa. Before James could get his bearings, the friggin' mayor of Westford came up and shook his hand. It wasn't completely out of the ordinary to run into the mayor. It was a small town after all, but still, James was dumbfounded. While Marilyn and some of her cronies monopolized Vanessa's attention, James sidled up to his father over by the wood stove. "Dad, what the hell?" he said softly. Henry just chortled. "Didn't you say you were bringing your future wife home? You think your mother wouldn't get a little worked up about that?" From across the room, Marilyn took an appraising look at Vanessa while the girl sipped a glass of wine and spoke with some of the neighbors. She was really pretty. Her facial features were exquisite. She had a nice figure, and she was dressed appropriately. The more Marilyn looked at her, the more satisfied she was. She already liked her. The other people from town kept glancing over at Vanessa. She felt her scalp go numb with discomfort at the scrutiny, but she gamely soldiered on. Back at the stove, James scolded his highly amused father. "When the hell did I say that?" Like any long-married husband, Henry quickly shifted the blame to his wife. "Well, maybe you didn't, but your mother sure did." James began to sputter, but then went mute. He'd only said he was bringing a guest, not a fiancé, not a bride, and not a daughter-in-law. Just when he thought these things couldn't get any more ridiculous, the mayor, Jim Fremont, raised his voice above the din. "James, speech!" Oh dear God, James thought. He expects me to formally introduce her to the crowd. While James's mind worked furiously for something to say, or even better, some way to extricate himself from this horror show, he was saved unexpectedly by his mother. "Leave him alone, Jimmy," she said as she took Vanessa's hand. "What is there to say? She's a wonderful girl and they're a perfect match." Okay, so maybe he wasn't saved. His mother's announcement shot the awkwardness through the roof. How could he possibly explain all of this to Vanessa? All he could do was look at her from across the room with pleading eyes, silently begging her to understand and hang in there. James was already envisioning his worst nightmare, Vanessa shaking off his mother's hand and saying loudly to the gathering, "I am not James's girlfriend." His parents would be humiliated in front of the entire town. James's heart was in his throat. He kept waiting for Vanessa to lose it, but before he could puke in terror in the potted majesty palm in the corner, Vanessa looked at his mother and gave her a bright smile as they resumed their conversation. He could have cried with relief. Marilyn felt like crying too. This girl was not only beautiful, but was sensible and refined without being judgmental or standoffish. Marilyn was not stupid. She knew it had to have been extremely difficult for this young city girl to suddenly find herself in the center of this rural rite of passage. But she was handling herself with grace. James was having similar but conflicted thoughts. Oh man, she is either truly enjoying herself or she's a phenomenal actress. To think I was worried she would run out of here screaming. I didn't expect her to be so amazing. What James did not know was that, after the initial shock wore off, Vanessa was genuinely touched by the warm welcome and thought everyone was very nice. Unlike his guess, she was not acting at all. She had lost her mother when she was young. Here she felt a love and warmth from James's mother that she had never experienced before. She also appreciated his father's quiet kindness, and the kindness from everyone there, really. She had grown up in high society, which certainly had its share of friendship and fun, but could often be a difficult social minefield to navigate. This was natural, effortless. She had to force herself not to cry. She felt it was she who had returned home, not James. While James stood there trying to sort out his thoughts, the mayor came over to him, snapping him out of his daze. "James, what are you standing here for with your mouth open catching flies? Let's go get a beer." James's mind was a mess. A beer sounded pretty good right now. Jim Fremont laughed when he saw James's blank expression. "Good for you," he said, as he directed him to the cooler. "You found such a wonderful girlfriend. You're very lucky." The mayor opened 2 bottles of beer, handed one to James, and clinked them together. James scanned the room helplessly. "It looks like a wedding reception," he mumbled. Then and there, he decided not to think about it anymore. He'd had enough. He would just go with the flow. The party showed no signs of letting up. Vanessa was swept away by everyone's goodwill. With Marilyn's motherly warmth presiding over it all, it made her feel intoxicated. If this was a dream, she did not want to wake up. Later in the evening, James took out the things he'd bought in Richmond. It was obvious many people from town had contributed to this affair, so with his parents' blessing, he distributed them as equitably as he could. He made sure Mayor Fremont got a nice bottle of whiskey, and he slipped a carton of cigarettes to his uncle, though he knew that he shouldn't. The flowers were for his mother. More discreetly, he also handed out the $10,000 in cash he'd gotten from the bank. He told people that he'd recently had a lucky run at the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut, but they weren't fooled. The beautiful, sophisticated girlfriend, the Mercedes, they knew that he had done well for himself in New York, and they appreciated that he was willing to spread around some of his good fortune. Mayor Fremont had opened the whiskey right away and poured glasses for any who desired. He swirled the deep red liquid in his cup and smiled broadly. "Looks like our hometown boy's done good," he said. Those within earshot laughed and toasted James as the party around them stretched late into the night. Episode 58. He blinked and blinked again. "Hey, get up." Early the next morning, James was roused from a sound slumber by Vanessa's shouts. "What are you doing up so early?" he asked. "Don't come in. Let me sleep for a bit more." He couldn't have been more comfortable. He had not slept in his childhood home for a long time. He rolled over and pulled the pillow over his head. The bedroom door was kicked open with a bang. "Vanessa, what the—" James popped his head up and saw his mother. "Mom?" Seeing her stern eyes, he felt like a frightened middle schooler again. He hadn't forgotten how strict she'd been when he was a kid. She was just short of taking off her slipper and whacking him with it. "Get up! Didn't you hear, Vanessa? Treat your girlfriend with some respect." Vanessa hid behind Marilyn and made a silly face at him. From the looks of it, the 2 ladies were still getting along very well. Okay. Take it easy, Mom, I'm getting up." James pulled the blanket around him and rolled out of bed. Westford was located in the heart of the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. James always thought it could have been a serious tourist destination if it weren't for the lack of decent roads. He had brought Vanessa to one of his favorite spots in the woods up behind his parents' home. She had never been to Appalachia before. She was so enthralled by the stunning views and soft breeze that she ran around like a kindergartner on a field trip. James breathed in the pure, fresh air. He'd forgotten how relaxing the countryside could be. Afterward, they jumped in the Mercedes and they drove into town. He showed her the general store, the school he attended as a kid, and some of his other childhood haunts. Vanessa felt as if she had truly walked into James's world. She leaned her head against his shoulder as they sat on the bench in front of the general store sipping coffee. A Range Rover suddenly pulled up and stopped in front of them. A young man about 22 years old hopped out. "James!" The guy was wearing designer clothes, sunglasses, a large watch on his wrist, and a gold chain around his neck. Everything about him screamed nouveau rich. Despite the familiar greeting, James didn't recognize him. "And you are?" "Dude, it's Drew. What? You don't remember me?" The newcomer quickly took off his sunglasses and walked over to them with a wide smile. When James saw who it actually was, he jumped up and gave his old friend a bear hug. "What are you wearing those ugly sunglasses for? I didn't know who you were." Drew's real name was Andrew Fremont, the mayor's son. The Fremonts were an old Westford family. His friend had never gone to college. Right after high school, he left town for a job in Richmond. Obviously, he'd done well for himself. Ha! The boy goes off to New York and forgets all the little people he left behind, Drew joked. Although they were a few years apart, the two had been part of the same childhood crew. James grinned at his old friend. A Range Rover? I'm impressed. You're still in Richmond, right? What are you doing these days? Don't be fooled by appearances, Drew said. I'm hustling projects here and there, working my butt off but barely making a living. Doesn't help that I spend money like a drunken sailor. Do you honestly think I need a Range Rover? They laughed in unison, instantly comfortable with each other as only old friends can be. Cut the crap, James said. You look great. What brings you back to town? Drew was beaming. I came back to see you. My dad called yesterday and told me you were home. I couldn't break away for the party last night because of work. Left at 5 in the morning to get here today. James put his arm around Drew's shoulder. You're the man. So what are your plans? Can you have lunch today? There's still a few bottles of good wine left. Never mind that, you impolite moron, Drew said, shrugging James's arm off and turning toward Vanessa. Who is this lovely woman? Introduce us already. Pardon my manners. Drew, this is Vanessa Harrison. Vanessa, Andrew Fremont. We grew up together. It's a pleasure to meet you, Drew said politely. James is lucky to have you as such a beautiful girlfriend. Vanessa nodded lightly, her face turning red with embarrassment. She really didn't have a major problem being called James's girlfriend, but it still caught her off guard. Drew turned back to James. I need to go see my parents first. We'll get together later. Then he got into his Range Rover and drove off. Cheers, mate. It was noon at the Tucker house. Andrew held a glass of wine and toasted his friend at the dining room table. James raised his wine in return. Cheers. He reached out and clinked glasses, and they each took a drink. His mother had prepared a lovely lunch, mostly leftovers from the party last night. After they were through eating and James's parents had cleared the plates, Vanessa excused herself and went to take a nap. Drew leaned back in his chair and looked at his friend seriously. Actually, there is something I want to talk to you about. Oh? What's up? James asked. Westford's doing well, Drew said, but there are still stubborn pockets of poverty in this county. I've had an idea for a long time to bring money into the region, create good jobs. It's ambitious, but I think I can pull it off. Sounds cool, James said. I have no doubt you're going to succeed. Drew looked at James with a hint of embarrassment. Brother, I don't think you're catching my drift. I'm looking for support in any and all places. He rubbed his thumb and fingers together. James got the message this time. He was being asked to chip in. You should have just asked, James said. What's your budget? Drew hesitated. I'll have to check for the exact figures, he said, but I need at least $200,000 in seed money. He seemed to have trouble saying the words. It was not a small amount in his eyes. He'd planned on casting a wide net for investors, so he'd be ecstatic if James cut him a check for a couple $1,000, though he'd appreciate anything, frankly. He had no clue that $200,000 was pocket change for James. Since the global check-in system had entered his life, his concept of money had been radically transformed. It was almost just a number to him now. James waved his hand. Sure, no problem. I'll transfer the money to you right now. Will that work? He pulled out his phone and looked at his friend expectantly. Drew blinked. He blinked again. You want to transfer it to me? Now? He figured it would take a long discussion and a lot more wine to get James on board for a contribution, but this was weird. It seemed all too easy. Was he really planning to fund the entire amount? Didn't he have any questions about the project? Andrew knew plenty of wealthy people in Richmond, but none of them could so casually commit to giving away almost $250,000. Yet his childhood friend had agreed just like that. Yes, James said. Is there a problem? Still in disbelief, Drew asked bluntly, You trust me that much? Aren't you afraid I might be scamming you? James sighed and smiled warmly. Drew, we grew up together. I know you. I know your family. I trust you. Just the fact that you came all the way back to Westford to see me is enough. So let's cut the crap, okay? What's your online banking username? Let's get this done. It wasn't that James trusted or didn't trust Andrew, but to him, $200,000 was nothing. Even if his friend was scamming him, he could spend money like water now. It would be no skin off his hide. Without more delay, they linked up their banking apps and completed the transfer. Just as James's email pinged telling him the transfer was successful, the silent system suddenly rang in his mind. Host has invested to help his hometown and has triggered a special reward. You have obtained a chance to draw for a special system skill. Does the host wish to draw it right away? Episode 59, Trump Card. Special system skill? James was constantly being surprised by the global check-in system. Doing something randomly apparently could trigger a special reward. He was lost in thought for a moment, forgetting he wasn't alone. I have to study this system more, he muttered to himself. Perhaps it isn't just limited to check-ins. Meanwhile, Andrew was over the moon. He provided a brief sketch of what he had in mind for a nature preserve and eco-friendly hotel to highlight the unique beauty of this part of the Blue Ridge. Don't you worry, he said. With your seed money, I know I can get this off the ground. Your generosity makes you a shareholder in this project. The feasibility studies are already in the works. I should be able to start construction in a matter of months. We're going to bring sustainable tourism and good jobs to this county. What do you think? Drew was enamored imagining their future together as business partners. He had the funds now. All he needed to do was execute the plan. Hey, are you listening to me? James was still deep in thought. Yoo-hoo, anyone in there? James suddenly came back to his senses and nodded absent-mindedly. He hadn't heard a word Drew had said. He was completely focused on the system. Andrew took it the wrong way. He thought James was concerned about the magnitude of the project and didn't believe in his ability to make it happen. He patted his chest and said, "Don't worry. I plan to have everything up and running within 2 years. It will be a completely different boat-toured county when you return. I've already assembled a small staff. I'll have my assistant provide you with the accounting of the funds and send progress reports regularly. I won't waste a single cent." Before James could say a thing, the system notification sounded in his mind again. Do you want to draw the lottery now? This definitely was not the time. No, later, he said in his mind. Then he looked at his friend and laughed. Dude, I just gave you a boatload of money so I don't have to deal with the details. I don't care about the process, I trust you. As long as you're working in the best interest of the people of Appalachia, I am not worried. So please, he continued, don't have your person send me any reports. I won't have the time to read them anyway. I'm going abroad soon and the trip might take a while. I'll have to trouble you to take charge of this project without my input. Drew smiled broadly. I will build it, and they will come, he said. I will not let you down. James laughed at the Field of Dreams quote. It was one of their favorite movies as kids. If you run short of funds, just call me. After talking business for a little while, they opened more wine and began reminiscing about their childhood. They drank and talked and laughed for several hours. In the end, Drew's father had to drive up the mountains to retrieve his son. Because of the system, James didn't feel the effects of the alcohol nearly as much. He just felt a little tipsy. Once Andrew was gone, he headed straight to his favorite old spot up in the woods behind his parents' house. He couldn't wait to see what kind of special skill he would draw this time. In a dense patch of forest, James sat cross-legged on a large rock. He scanned the area to make sure there was nobody else around. He was full of anticipation and desire. The last time he had leveled up, he obtained 2 special skills, a photographic memory and advanced ship sailing skills. He didn't know what he would get this time. Suppressing his excitement, he said in his mind, System, I want to draw the lottery. As soon as he finished speaking, the main interface of the system pulled up the wheel and it began to roll exactly the same as the last time. The draw is in progress. After a few seconds that felt like a few centuries, the wheel finally stopped. Congratulations to the host for drawing a special combat skill, Kung Fu Grand Master. James was thrilled. Kung Fu Grandmaster, he thought. Oh my God. This is too much. The skill is being transferred. Host, please acknowledge and accept it. Before James had time to think, he felt a brief, sharp pain in his head. He closed his eyes. Suddenly, there was an inexplicably warm current in his brain as a huge amount of information flowed into it. When the feeling dissipated, he slowly opened his eyes. There was an unprecedented surge of power in his body. He jumped off the rock and lightly landed on the grass. A familiar kung fu training pattern instantly appeared in his mind. James started practicing in the forest. Martial arts moves smoothly flowed out of him like a mountain stream. Although he had always been in decent shape, James had never practiced martial arts. But now it was as if he had trained for years. He was like a hardened warrior. He pivoted gracefully toward a big tree. Bang! He hit it with a well-aimed strike. The tree shook violently, and its leaves fell to the ground. A clear mark of a fist appeared on the trunk where he'd made contact. Oh my God! This is too awesome! He turned his hand around and saw that his fist was not damaged at all. Then he had an epiphany. He believed that these special skills wouldn't be distributed blindly. The system had its own mysterious logic, and every skill had a specific function. Maybe he would need to use Kung Fu in the future. The world was unpredictable after all. It was best to know how to defend himself without having to rely on bodyguards. He would have many more options to respond in case of unforeseen circumstances. Though he was not well known yet, James was now a billionaire. Word would inevitably get out. It was very likely that he would become a target. There was no lack of people who coveted the wealth of others. But now he had a trump card to protect himself, his family, and his friends. Even better, this trump card was hidden. No one had any idea that he was a martial arts grandmaster. It might become useful at a crucial moment. James calmed his breathing and sunk his consciousness into the system. Now that he had acquired another special skill, it was time for him to study the system again. Episode 60. More dangerous than a bear. System, get the hell out here, James shouted loudly in his mind. What do you need, host? Its response was prompt. After being taught a lesson before, the system did not dare to show him any neglect or disrespect. Tell me honestly, what's with this special reward? James asked in a threatening tone. It is a random reward based on the host's behavior, the system explained. In human terms, when the system decides that the host's actions are meaningful and in line with the system's values, the system will give special rewards to the host. Then is this also the system's mission? He asked. To give me rewards? Not really, it replied, because there are only check-in missions in the system. No other missions have been issued. James needed to be sure. So does this mean that in the future, I can only rely on myself to trigger such a special reward, and I can't predict what the reward will be? The system's answer was swift. Strictly speaking, yes. Okay, I understand, James said. He paused and continued. Then what actions are judged as meaningful? After all, acquiring these special skills was too tempting. James felt that the more he could obtain, the better. Each one would be a huge benefit for him, a trump card in the truest sense. The system's judgment is random. The host's question has exceeded the system's parameters. The system cannot answer this question. James did not insist on getting an answer. After all, the system had its own rules. He would just have to learn as he spent more time with it. His mind raced as he walked through the dense forest back towards his folks' place. It seems like there should be a higher level of authority, he thought. Perhaps I need to keep leveling up myself to reach it. He came to a small fallen tree in his path and attempted to hop over it. To his surprise, he covered 15 feet in a single leap. Goodness, am I even human anymore? He looked at his legs in disbelief. They seemed the same as ever, but the strength hidden within them was astounding. He felt both endlessly strong and light as a feather. Right at that moment, the bushes on his left began to shake violently, followed by a rustling sound. He immediately crouched in the little clearing where he stood, ready to spring into action. Not more than 10 yards away, James could hear snuffling and grunting in the thick shrubbery. It was definitely an animal of some sort, a large one. Westford was surrounded by forests and mountains. Although the scenery was beautiful, there were dangerous animals roaming these hills. In particular, the number of wild boars in the region had increased dramatically. They bred quickly and had become a terrible menace. James cursed his lousy luck. He didn't want to tangle with a goddamn boar right now. They could be more dangerous than bears. Although he was a little scared, he had no intention of sitting there and waiting to be attacked. He had to slowly retreat and get out of the woods as soon as possible. Where was Dad and his shotgun when you needed him? A deep guttural roar resounded in the vegetation. A brown boar, at least 6 feet long and more than 3 feet tall, suddenly broke into the clearing. Damn, it is a friggin' boar. James didn't hesitate. He turned around and ran with all his strength. In seconds, he came to a big tree and jumped onto the nearest sturdy branch from the ground, about 8 feet up. After stabilizing himself, he looked down at the wild boar below. Although he had just obtained an amazing set of martial art combat skills, he wasn't clear about the situation. He didn't know how many boars were hiding in the bushes. If he really was facing a whole herd of the things, he reckoned that even a grandmaster like him wouldn't be able to take them on. Besides, anyone who'd ever read Sun Tzu knew that the highest form of martial arts was to escape a superior enemy without fighting. The wild boar was now tromping around under the tree and letting out deep roars from its throat. It stared at James squatting on the branch above. The beast's twin 3-inch-long tusks emitted a cold glint. The boar seemed agitated. It circled under the tree aggressively. From time to time, it would set its front legs on the trunk as if trying to climb up. Okay, now this was getting absurd. Seeing a pig trying to climb a tree made James laugh. Then the situation became even more ridiculous. The animal started to bite the tree trunk with its sharp teeth. It seemed as if he was trying to chew the tree down. Damn, this thing is nuts, James muttered. After he'd observed the routine for more than 10 minutes and was satisfied there was no other boars around, he jumped down from the tree. He figured he could deal with a lone wild boar. He made a come here gesture at the animal. Since you're so eager to fill my freezer with your meat, I'll have to accept your kind offer. The boar raised its head, its small eyes shining with a fierce light. Then it roared and charged. It came in fast, but James was faster. With just a step, he easily dodged the attack. Although the boar was huge, it was unusually agile. After missing James, it quickly changed directions and charged again. But the result was the same. James dodged its attack. For the next several minutes, he sidestepped like a dancer, gracefully evading the boar's attempts to get at him. The beast was furious. It faced James, seeming to consider its next move. It bent its hind legs back, forming a strange bow-like posture. Then, with a tremendous roar, its huge body shot at him like an arrow. This time, James stood in place and did not move. He bent his legs slightly, and his body's center of gravity sank. At a glance, his next move seemed slow, but he executed it with blinding speed. He balled his right hand into a fist in front of his chest, then punched out violently toward the wild boar crashing into him. A dull thud rang out in the dense forest. James's fist collided with the boar's head. A gust of wind from the impact swept through the clearing. Dust flew everywhere, and leaves were blown off the tree branches above. The huge boar was sent flying by James's punch. While in the air, its head exploded. Its brain matter scattered all over the ground, splotching the vegetation a sickening red and white. With another heavy thud, the beast landed on the ground 10 feet away. It was dead. James stared at the carcass in a daze, its head literally blown apart by his fist. Holy cow, was all he could muster.